This is the story of a revoked velvet robe, a vanished heraldic banner, and the precise moment Queen Camilla realized that the most exclusive order of chivalry in Christendom would never be used to legitimize her civilian bloodline. In less than 48 hours, what was designed to be the ultimate public elevation of the Parker Bowles family inside Windsor Castle ended in a devastating, coldly orchestrated institutional expulsion. As Camilla watched the grand procession of the Order of the Garter wind down the hill towards St. George's Chapel, expecting to see her family positioned at the absolute epicenter of the sovereign enclosure, her world collapsed. Her children had been turned away from the royal gate and relegated to the public viewing stands, stripped of all aristocratic pretense. What she discovered behind closed doors is that while she may hold the title of Queen, she has absolutely no power to rewrite the ancestral architecture of the British Crown. What this video will unpack is the anatomy of a silent, ruthless institutional retaliation that took place during the historic June 2026 Garter Day ceremonies. We are going to examine the secret heraldic power grab Camilla attempted behind the scenes, manipulating the Garter Council in a desperate effort to secure a permanent noble legacy for her civilian children. We will explore how Prince William, acting as the fierce forensic guardian of the bloodline, uncovered this paper trail and executed a brutal administrative checkmate just hours before the procession began. By the end of this analysis, you will understand the staggering psychological blow delivered to Camilla when she finally understood that her 30-year campaign to conquer the internal hierarchy of the Windsor dynasty had hit an immovable, unyielding wall. To understand why this tactical trap snapped shut with such devastating precision, we first have to rebuild the towering illusion of absolute authority Camilla has constructed over the last 3 decades. For years, she executed a masterclass in psychological endurance and media manipulation. She absorbed the public hatred, survived the darkest tabloid storms, and meticulously transformed herself from the ultimate outsider into the anointed Queen Consort. Following the transition of power, her survival instinct morphed into a dangerous sense of total ownership. As King Charles faced mounting physical challenges in early 2026, requiring him to delegate more of his daily workload, Camilla began to view the transitional vulnerabilities of the crown, not as a delicate constitutional period, but as an administrative window of opportunity. She believed she had the king completely controlled, and in her mind, the king's authority was her authority. She assumed that her elevation to the throne room meant she possessed the right to project the visual equivalence of a blood monarch. She looked at the fractured royal landscape, saw Catherine operating with quiet restraint away from the public eye, and believed she was completely, undeniably untouchable. This sense of absolute dominance led her to focus on the ultimate prize, the permanent integration of her own children Tom and Laura into the historic fabric of the British aristocracy. She knew that titles granted by the crown can be ephemeral, but membership and visual recognition within the ancient orders of chivalry are etched permanently into the history books. The Order of the Garter is the absolute pinnacle of this aristocratic validation. Founded by King Edward III in the 14th century, it is the oldest and most prestigious order of knighthood in the United Kingdom. Its members are chosen personally by the sovereign for acts of supreme statecraft or historic service. For centuries, the heraldic banners of these knights have hung in the choir stalls of St. George's Chapel at Windsor, serving as a permanent visual map of the nation's true power structure. Camilla calculated that if she could weave her family's presence into the sacred theatre during the 2026 procession, she would achieve a level of historical legitimacy that no future monarch could ever truly erase. The trigger for this crisis was a quiet, deeply cynical administrative maneuver centered around the Garter Council's annual review. What appears to be true, based on the shifting of palace logistics and the sudden alteration of ceremonial seating matrices, is that Camilla's office quietly submitted an unprecedented series of amendments to the Garter King of Arms. The plan was as subtle as it was insidious. Camilla sought to exploit a rare grey area in the Order's statutes to request an extraordinary honorary affiliation for her son, Tom Parker Bowles, alongside a radical reorganization of the heraldic banner placements within the chapel itself. She requested that the historic banners of certain minor blood royals be temporarily moved to secondary stalls, creating a prominent visual vacancy directly adjacent to the sovereign's personal enclosure. Her camp then submitted a request to position her civilian family within that specific VIP perimeter during the globally televised procession, effectively framing them as permanent peers of the bloodline. It was a maneuver born of profound commercial desperation. Camilla owns no vast historical estates. She holds no independent noble lineage that will survive her husband's reign. She realized that by hijacking the visual real estate of the nation's highest order of chivalry, she could artificially inflate her family's standing and broadcast to the political establishment that the Parker Bowles faction was the new epicenter of the modern court. She calculated that Prince William would be too distracted by his own immense state duties to notice a high-level adjustments to a medieval ceremonial layout. She assumed that the palace bureaucracy, eager to accommodate the king's wife during a period of intense domestic strain, would silently process the paperwork bearing her office's seal. But she fundamentally misunderstood the ruthless institutional discipline of the Prince of Wales. Prince William did not find out through palace gossip or a leaked tabloid article. He found out because he operates the monarchy like a chief executive auditing a vulnerable corporation. As the Prince of Wales and a senior royal knight companion of the Garter, William maintains a strict forensic oversight of the order's historical registries and constitutional parameters. When the revised heraldic blueprints and the request for civilian gate clearances crossed the desks of the Garter Council, an archivist loyal to the old guard immediately flagged the irregular administrative bypass and brought it directly to the heir apparent. What William discovered was a calculated, staggering exploitation of protocol. Camilla was attempting to convert an 800-year-old institution of sovereign statecraft into a private public relations agency for her civilian bloodline. It was a direct insult to the uncomplaining sacrifice of the working royals who spent decades proving their loyalty to the state before being granted access to such sacred honors. William realized that if this precedent was allowed to stand, Camilla would successfully strip mine the moral and historical fabric of the monarchy to build an artificial monument to her own ambition. And so, the Prince of Wales did not scream. He did not confront Camilla in the private drawing rooms of Windsor Castle. He weaponized the system. The execution of his revenge was a masterclass in cold institutional warfare, working in silent alignment with senior heraldic scholars and the officers of arms. William allowed the illusion to continue just long enough for the trap to be inescapable. He let Camilla's camp finalize their bespoke ceremonial wardrobes. He let her family prepare for their grand public entrance, believing they were about to occupy the absolute center of gravity of the British aristocracy. He let her believe that her ultimate social takeover was completely secure and that the history books were finally hers to rewrite. And then the invisible hand of the future king moved. Utilizing his absolute legal leverage as the primary stakeholder of the Windsor legacy, William initiated a brutal, comprehensive administrative checkmate. He did not simply deny the specific requests. He invoked a strict, uncompromising adherence to the ancient foundational statutes of the order. The register was locked. The original choir stall placements honoring the direct line succession were flawlessly restored. The directives issued by the Queen's office were quietly marked as unauthorized and systematically revoked. What looked like a routine legal update to the ceremonial manuals was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's empire. When Camilla arrived at Windsor Castle on the morning of the Garter procession, anticipating a triumphant validation of her family's new status, the reality of her defeat was laid bare in black and white. The final operational binders delivered to her private suite revealed that her family's VIP gate passes had been entirely deactivated. The security officers at the sovereign perimeter had been given strict orders to redirect her, non-royal children, away from the chapel enclosure and straight to the standard civilian viewing stands, forcing them to sit among the public crowds. The realization hit Camilla with the force of a physical blow. The prestige, the heraldry, the true moral authority of the monarchy, it all belongs to the bloodline. She cannot elevate a single member of her family without the explicit permission of the true heir. Trapped, deeply humiliated, and watching the grand procession proceed without a single trace of her carefully planned strategy, Camilla sat in her private apartments. In a state of absolute panic, she reached for the secure telephone line and dialed King Charles, desperately expecting the man who had fought for her for 30 years to override his son and save her from the cold fury of the Prince of Wales. The phone call from Camilla to King Charles was supposed to be the moment the shield was raised one last time. For over 30 years, Charles had broken every social contract to fight his own mother and sacrificed his public standing to ensure that Camilla would one day stand beside him as an equal. In her panic, as the reality of Prince William's brutal Garter Day checkmate set in, She expected that same unconditional protection. She expected the king to exercise his sovereign prerogative, override the Garter Council, and force his son to restore her family to the royal enclosure. But when the king finally spoke, his voice carried none of the sovereign fury she expected. It carried only the quiet, crushing weight of exhaustion. Charles did not order the Garter King of Arms to reverse the decree. He did not demand that his son restore the VIP clearance. Instead, he quietly told her that the foundational statutes were absolute. The decision was locked, and there was nothing he could do. That devastating silence from the monarch was the true psychological climax of the entire crisis. It was the exact moment the illusion of absolute power shattered permanently. Camilla was forced to realize that her husband's profound devotion did not equate to institutional immunity. To understand why Charles refused to save her grand chivalric strategy, we have to look at the cold, hard mechanics of royal survival. Charles is deeply aware that his reign is transitional, compressed, and intensely scrutinized. To publicly override his heir and explicitly violate the ancient parliamentary-backed rules of the nation's highest order of knighthood, just to indulge his wife's family vanity, would be an unmitigated disaster. William had brilliantly framed the administrative correction not as a personal vendetta against his stepmother, but as a rigid adherence to historical integrity. Faced with a choice between protecting Camilla's social ambition and preserving the untainted dignity of his own fragile reign, Charles chose the crown. This brings us to the staggering reality of Camilla's commercial desperation. The public often assumes that because she wears a crown on the state occasions, she possesses permanent institutional wealth and structural authority. Nothing could be further from the truth. The brutal reality that William's forensic audit exposed is that Camilla actually owns absolutely nothing within the sovereign framework. The multi-billion-dollar engines of the royal family, the Duchy of Cornwall, and the historic sovereign estates belong entirely to William and the state. Camilla's access to grandeur is essentially a temporary lease, entirely dependent on the breath in Charles's lungs. Her desperate push to inject her civilian children into the Order of the Garter was a frantic, calculated attempt to build a permanent noble legacy before that clock runs out. She knows she is a consort operating on borrowed time. The moment the crown transitions to the next generation, her institutional relevance ceases instantly. She will become the Dowager Queen, living entirely at the financial, logistical, and residential mercy of King William. He will control the palaces she is permitted to inhabit, the security details assigned to protect her, and the discretionary allowances that fund her lifestyle. She was trying to force the aristocracy to accept her family as permanent peers of the bloodline precisely because she knows they possess no structural right to remain in that circle once Charles is gone. But the cargo of her ambition was flatly denied at the gate. This structural realignment is profoundly evident in how Catherine, the Princess of Wales, quietly holds the institutional future. While Camilla was reduced to nursing the wounds of her family's public humiliation, Catherine effortlessly secured the ultimate visual legacy of the monarchy. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power in the royal family never simply disappears, it is redistributed. Catherine did not gloat over the collapse of Camilla's heraldic power grab. She did not leak triumphant stories to the press. Her execution of power was entirely visual, elevated, and devastatingly precise. During the Garter procession, while the Parker Bowles faction sat relegated to the civilian stands, Catherine occupied her rightful place at the absolute center of gravity. What looked like a routine ceremonial appearance was actually a definitive declaration of ownership. The detail that mattered most was entirely visual. Catherine did not need to manipulate ancient statutes to justify her relevance. She stood beside William, radiating absolute continuity, her presence validating the unbroken line of the true monarchy. Every gesture from the heralds, every subtle deference from the assembled nobility proved that the court has already read the room and looked toward the future. They know that Catherine is the authentic matriarch of the next era. Following this devastating checkmate, subtle administrative shifts began sweeping through the royal residences. Palace staff, taking their cues from the new center of gravity established by William, quietly executed a series of protocol corrections. The access codes to the primary ceremonial planning ledgers were updated, explicitly requiring dual authorization from the Prince of Wales for any future noble or civilian invitations within the secure royal cordons. The side doors to the royal machinery were permanently bolted shut. It is a daily, inescapable reminder to Camilla that she may occupy the highest social position in the land. But she will never be permitted to exploit the historical legacy of the institution. What this story ultimately reveals is the profound evolution of Prince William. He is no longer just the grieving son walking behind a coffin, nor is he merely a dutiful heir waiting his turn. He has become a ruthless, hyper-competent architect of royal survival. He understands that the monarchy is a business, a brand, and a continuous historical threat, and he will not allow its most sacred symbols to be plundered by civilian interlopers acting out of commercial desperation. Camilla thought she was playing a game of global dominance, but William was playing a game of institutional preservation. He let her reach the very height of her arrogance, let her broadcast her intentions to her inner circle, and then he simply pulled the administrative floor out from under her family. She has been left with the title of Queen, only to realize it is an empty vessel, managed, audited, and entirely controlled by her stepson. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics of the royal family. If you found this forensic breakdown insightful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more long-form analytical content. Let me know in the comments below, do you think Prince William was right to use the ancient statutes to block the Queen Consort's family? Or was it a step too far? I read every single comment and I will see you in the next video.